clothing they wore 1,000 years ago is very different from the clothing you wear today. To tell you more about the wardrobe of the 11th century, once again, their majesties.
In the Middle Ages, clothing worn was a clear sign of a person's rank in society. Peasants dressed very simply in clothes fashioned from the simplest of materials, while noblemen and women surrounded themselves in the finest of materials and the most expensive of jewels. My lady?
Women wore headdresses, long flowing gowns, cloaks and belts adorned with jewels. Now there were minor changes to a woman's outfit as the seasons changed. In the winter, women wore more petticoats, garments worn beneath the gown, a thicker cloak for venturing out to the bitter cold, and simple shoes. For the rest of the year, a woman wore a slipper made of very thin material. But if a woman wanted to be really daring, the time for her to go shoeless was during the summer. Of course, a woman of noble birth running around barefoot was considered scandalous behavior. But due to the length of her gown, a woman could go barefoot and almost no one would ever know. Now the gowns, except for minor sleeve length changes and color changes, remained the same for every season, and for the most part were perfect for every season except for the summer. Remember that these gowns were fashioned from only the finest of materials and jewels, making them very heavy and hot, making the summer season most uncomfortable for women born into the nobility. Well, unfortunately, there was an even greater problem in the season's change. Due to the lavishness of these gowns, women did not have that many of them. In fact, they only had one or two, and this was often the extent of their entire wardrobe. Now, even in the medieval era, the week had 7 days, and they did not launder as much as we do today. So women often had to wear their gowns day after day, clean or not clean. And hygiene was not quite up to today's standards, so you put the two together and you get somewhat of a fragrance problem, shall I say. And to mask the aroma, perfume was created. And to share with you more about the wardrobe of the men of the nobility, once again, my Lord King.
The men of the time period wore tunics which were slit up the center, that is what I'm wearing here. And the reason for this slit was to allow a nobleman to mount his horse without obstruction. Gauntlets or bracers of thick leather were worn on the wrists to protect them from slashing swords. Cloaks or capes were also worn, and on the feet, thick leather boots that extended up the calf. Now, the knights of the time period wore chain mail. Chain mail is a series of iron loops intricately fashioned together to protect its wearer from skin-piercing weapons. When held in the hand, it is quite heavy, but when placed upon the body, the weight was evenly distributed, thus assuring maneuverability. Now, the suits of armor the knights wore were developed in stages, beginning with just the helmet, later having the cuirass, or sleeveless breastplate, evolving eventually into the full-bodied suit of armor, complete with helmet, breastplate, and leggings. Now, when a knight was ready for the tournament, his squire would help him upon his mighty war horse, and once mounted, the medieval knight was a formidable opponent. He would arrive at the tournament or battlefield with his helmet's visor open, but once the event began, the helmet would be closed, and the knight would get down to business. And there you have it. The knight is dressed and ready for the tournament.
Ready for the tournament, indeed. Life 1,000 years ago is very different from your lives today. Even for the highest of nobility, castles could be cold, dark, damp places. The only light was provided by crude homemade candles. In the winter there was very little heat, and in the summer no air conditioning. There was of course no television and no video games. It's tragic. The trials and ordeals of medieval life, there was time for celebration and for entertainment, and by far the most popular of these entertainments was known as the Great Tournament. Imagine yourself standing in the bright sun of a midsummer's day on a great green field. In front of you stands a castle, its walls glowing golden in the sun. The greensward all around you is dotted with brightly colored pavilions of knights who would travel for months, sometimes thousands of miles, to compete here in these lists for fame, for fortune, for honor, and for glory. Now at night, the visiting nobles were invited into the host castle, and there a great feast was laid on. Amidst much rejoicing, they renewed old acquaintances and formed new alliances as they were entertained by dancers and minstrels. And then, very late in the evening, once the fires had been banked, the medieval storytellers would arrive. Now, the storytellers were the delight of nobility 1,000 years ago, but with them they brought tales of knights from far off and distant lands who performed deeds of bravery and chivalry. Perhaps the next morning, the Master Falconer would be summoned. The knights and their ladies would mount the horses, birds of prey upon their fists, and ride into the forest for that day's hunt. The castle of His Majesty is filled with creatures both great and small, of hoof and wing. Suspend but for a few moments your invitation to the tournament and join us in the hunt.
Yes. In the hours before dawn, as mists cover the field, and the great forest lies in darkness still, my Master Falconer stalks his prey in an ancient ceremony that dates back to time forgotten.
With the winged hunter upon his fist, Lord William of Bayshire, His Majesty's Master Falconer, seeks the chase.
My lords and my ladies, this mighty bird of prey will grace us in free flight about the arena, passing very closely to many of you. And so, for the next few moments, I must insist that you keep your hands, your flags, your swords, and your banners down. And do remain seated for the duration of the Falcon's flight.
The Falcon, poised for flight, has come forth hooded, but once the hood has been removed, the age-old dance of the hunted and the hunter begins.
Behold the sport of kings.
I do remind you to stay in your seats and keep your hands down by your sides, please.
How the hell is going to the floor? How come it's not coming over here?
Closely. It is done.
Did you see him catch that? He caught that in midair.
What you've seen is known as lure flying. It is used by the Master Falconer to increase the bird's strength and stamina for long hunts in the wild, and helps to ensure that the watchful eye of Lord William, that the charge remains keen to the lure. The Master Falconer must allow the bird a little bit of the meat off the lure to ensure that she remains keen or hungry to targets for flights in the future. And then he will entice her back to his glove. To fist and to feast, my lord, well done. But now, my friends, raise your cheer for Lord William of Bayshire, His Majesty's Master Falconer, and Pruitt, his mighty bird of prey.
That was cool.
Now, as I said, the knights and their ladies would ride into the forest for that hunt. To tell you more about the role of noble women at court, once again, Her Royal Highness.
Men were not the only ones who attended these tournaments. Women always accompanied their husbands and families to these celebrations. They simply did not compete. It was considered unladylike. Now, women looked forward to these tournaments for two reasons. First, Due to the vast distances that separated most people, it was a reuniting of family members separated by marriage. And second, it was a rare opportunity to socialize. Here they could talk about the latest issues, such as child-rearing and fashion, but one of the most important topics of conversation involved marriage. In the medieval era, most marriages were political arrangements, not marriages of love. Therefore, these tournaments were the perfect opportunity for women to choose the best match for her son or daughter. But what was a woman looking for in the perfect match? Wealth, status, and popularity, all things that would better the career and reputation of her husband and family in the future. Now, once a woman had set her sights on a prospective family, the exchanges began. The two families would establish terms, and a verbal agreement would be set. In an era when the word of a nobleman or woman was their bond, this agreement was binding until the children were old enough to marry. But that was just women with young children. What about single women looking to marry? Well, these tournaments were also the perfect opportunity for women to look for a potential husband, something that some women did entirely on their own. Just kidding. Unfortunately, like everything else, these tournaments would come to an end, but women became skilled masters at mixing business with pleasure. Lord Chancellor?
A tournament and a feast. Perhaps the next day a hunt in the forest, and more feasting. The next day another tournament and another feast. These tournaments went on for weeks, sometimes months, but as the summer drew to a close, it was time for the knights to return to their own kingdoms. Travel 10 centuries ago was very treacherous. There were almost no roads, and very few bridges over which to ford the great rivers of Europe. And so before the winter set in, the knights would pack up all their weapons, baggage, men-at-arms, and huge trains or caravans. The knights would mount their horses, ride to the front of these great formations, and down the road they would set. Now, as they approached each town or village, they would pause. Trumpets would sound, there to herald the arrival of these noble companies. The squires were marched proudly into these towns, carrying the knights' banners on high. On these banners were the symbols of the knight's noble family. This is the earliest appearance of the science of heraldry, which still exists today. To tell you more about the symbols of his noble house, once again, His Majesty.
Picture yourself in the heat of battle. Hundreds of armored knights around you. The air is thick with dust and ringing with the clash of swords. Everyone around you is covered in dirt and blood. You raise your mighty sword preparing to strike, when all of a sudden you realize everyone looks the same. You cannot see anyone's face through their helmet. How does one recognize allies or enemies on the field of battle? Heraldry. It was the only way to identify friend from foe. Now, once a man was dubbed a knight, he would receive a coat of arms. A coat of arms is a collection of symbols or devices that denoted virtues such as courage or generosity. Now, today, you will be able to recognize your knight by the colors he is wearing, but if you look closely, you will also notice symbols on his clothing, banners, and horse, which also identify him. Now here is my coat of arms. The red signifies military strength. The gold symbolizes generosity. The blue represents loyalty and truth, while the stars symbolize many victories in battle. The two eagles, their heads facing in two different directions, symbolize insightfulness and wisdom, while their open talons denote readiness to bring ruin to rebels and evildoers. Now, how does one acquire a coat of arms? Well, first one must become a knight. But that is no easy task. As a squire, you must go through rigorous training to master the art of weaponry. And the master of weapons in my castle is my Lord Marshal, Sir Stephen.
The mastery of weapons and the art of war, two of the most important roles of a medieval knight. When called upon to defend his land and his home, a knight must possess these tools to fashion a victory. At tournament, he learns to pit these skills against other knights, so that when he is called upon by his king, he is prepared for the battle. Now, one young man in training here at the castle is Squire Kevin, and I would like to invite him to join us. Squire Kevin, attend me. As a knight, he'll be assisted at tournament, and so I shall also summon Squire Edward. My lords, my ladies, raise a cheer for these two young squires. After years of training as a child, a full-fledged knight will know well the use of each weapon in turn. My lords, my ladies, weapons of the medieval age. To begin, we have the lance. Many of you will recognize the lance when you picture a knight, dressed in full armor and array, preparing to ride into battle. The lance is approximately 8 feet in length, and weighs about 20 pounds. The lance was used by knights on horseback to charge at his enemy, attempting to strike him from his steed. Now, it was also used to strike enemies that were on foot, as I shall now demonstrate. Squire Kevin, take him a shield and move to the center. Now, Squire, if you truly wish to become a knight of the realm, you will stand your ground against my attack. A knight's courage shall never falter in combat. Do you understand? Very well, then. Bravely done.
That's what they do with lances.
Next, we have the alavarda, a weapon used for ground combat. Now, it was first used to keep the enemy at a distance by swinging it straight out and across, like this. Yeah. Well done. Secondly, it was used to knock enemies that were on horse. As you can see, the head of this weapon has 3 points: a hook for pulling, a spike for impaling, and a blade for cutting. Now, my lords and ladies, we have the mandoble, also known as the broadsword. This was indeed the most common weapon among knights. There are many different types and styles of broadswords, and on average weighed anywhere from 10 to 50 pounds, and could chop off a limb with a powerful blow. Squire, defend yourself. Well done, Squire. Now, in the heat of battle, combat was hand to hand, with little or no room to maneuver, and so short and deadly weapons, such as the axe, were used. When swung by a powerful knight, the axe often left an opponent unable to counterattack, as he was busy defending against blows, such as these. Well done, Squire. Your courage serves you well. Now, as more and more armor came into use, weapons such as the axe were less effective. The blades simply could not penetrate the heavy suits of armor, and so crushing weapons such as the mace were used. Designed to crush or collapse armor and shield, a mace often left a knight trapped inside his heavy suit of armor, unable to move freely, thus forcing a quick surrender. And finally, we have the bola, or flail. This was indeed the hardest weapon to master. There's a smaller one-handed version for use on horseback, and this larger two-handed version for ground combat. The swinging of the arms would drive the weighted balls at great speeds, delivering crushing blows to both armor and shield. And if wrapped around an opponent's weapon, the chain could be used to disarm him. Once again, Squire. You can see, very effective if used properly. Well done, Squire. You've demonstrated both strength and grace. Indeed, well done to you both. Soon, Squire Kevin, we shall see you upon this field, wearing the noble crest of a knight. My lords, my ladies, raise a cheer once again for these two young squires. Now, before a young squire can compete in tournament, he must first be elevated to the rank of knight. For this, the ceremonial sword of knighthood was used. On this blade, a knight swears loyalty to his king and to the code of chivalry that will govern his conduct as a noble knight. There you have it. Hey, look at the weapons that you will see in today's tournament. Your Majesty,
Well done indeed. My lords, my ladies, raise a cheer for my Lord Marshal, Celestier! Now there were two ways a young man could attain the rank of knighthood. He could be dubbed a knight on the field of service for valor in service to his lord, or, as was usually the case, the son of a knight could become a squire at a very young age. He would go through rigorous training. He learned the art of horsemanship and mastered weaponry. He also tended to the stable chores and the polishing of armor. Now, ideally, a young squire would learn to read and write and be educated in business affairs, since he would be expected to administer lands held by his king once he had achieved his rank. Now, when the young man was finally ready, the ceremony of knighthood would take place. Once that ceremony was complete, a little-known ceremony known as the buffet would be performed by the father of the young knight. The buffet is the highlight of the ceremony and is my favorite part. The buffet is an open-handed whack to the back of the head. Now this was to be the last unanswered blow the young knight would ever endure, and it was believed to help him remember his oath to the code of chivalry for the rest of his life. And there you have it, a few moments spent learning at knights bent on chivalry, and the people who shared this time with them. On behalf of the Princess, the Lord Marshal, and the Lord Chancellor, I would like to thank you all for sitting quietly and politely throughout this presentation, and I sincerely hope that you now take this opportunity to make as much noise as possible. Let the tournament begin!
Restless, ever-moving prey that he knew